All right. For those of you who didn't meet me on Monday, my name's Greg Wipzinski, and I'm with the Graduate Studies Office here at Oshkosh. And on Monday, we talked about the idea of how to go about thinking about graduate school or deciding graduate school, whether or not you want to go, when should you go, where might you go, that kind of thing. Today what we're going to do is we're going to just go through and try and address any... Nobody saw that. We're going to try and answer any of your questions that you have about the process. So this is about the nuts and bolts. So if you've got any ideas about how you want to go through the process to apply to graduate school, or if you have any questions or you're not sure, whatever the case might be, just let's get them out there. So I'm more than happy to try and talk through these things and have us have a conversation as opposed to me just up here blathering around. But what I wanted to show you in terms of the PowerPoint copies that I handed out, the PowerPoint that I'm referring to is up on our Graduate Studies website, and it's up right up in here on the prospective student page, and there's a little link down here for it. It's out there as a PDF. But I just wanted to show that to you so that you knew that that was there, because that's what we're going to be referring to. And if you want to come back to that online, when you come back to it, I have links built into it, and so with those links, it'll take you to whatever we referenced, and so it makes it a little easier for you, so you don't have to navigate through the web through Google or some other searching at the time that you're looking at graduate schools. Okay, so what I want to do. Okay, so in the process of going to graduate school and applying and so forth, we've got these kinds of things to be dealing with. You have to apply, you might have to take a test, you might have to provide a writing sample, you have to think about financial aid, what you want to do in terms of how you want to pay for graduate school. So there's all sorts of stuff to do. Obviously, the sooner you do it, the better. The earlier that you can apply, the better. We talked a little bit about on Monday that the ideal is that you could spend about a year in advance of when you want to get into graduate school going through this process, maybe even a year and a half. Depends upon the kind of program and the deadlines and what you're thinking about. But this process, like I said, is more about how you actually go through and what you're going to find when you're filling out applications or what questions you might have about that. So we'll talk about that a little bit here. All right, applying for admission. Anybody here actually apply? Anybody here applied to go to graduate school so far? No? Okay, that's okay. Anybody here actually thinking about graduate school? Okay, all right, cool. So the application process is pretty straightforward. It's just like when you applied as an undergraduate. Usually they're going to be online, and you go through a process of filling out all the information. There are fees associated with applying just like there were as an undergraduate. They can range anywhere from usually around $25 at the lowest, upwards of about $75, could be $100. Just depends on the school. Oshkosh, as an example, is 56 bucks. So it's, depending upon how many schools you apply to, could be a little expensive just to go through the application process. So you want to be a little bit selective about where you're going to apply, because it's not like it's free and you could apply to 15 schools. You have to limit it. If it's going to cost you $50 a pop, you may only have the option to apply to 2 or 3 of them, that kind of thing. Now, in this particular slide here, I've got links to the actual applications that you would find if you clicked on here. And all these are just to kind of give you an idea of what you're going to come across when you come to their page. And in this case with UNLV, you're applying to the graduate college, and they go through here, and you're going to see all sorts of information. They're going to give you instructions, they're going to give you an idea about how to apply, when to apply, what's required, all of that kind of stuff. They're going to give you other information that's going to be necessary for you to go through the process. Here you can see they identified it's a $60 fee to apply. so UNLV. And you just kind of go through here and kind of work through all of this stuff. Yeah?
Is there a limit to how many times you can apply to a graduate school? Say if they deny you the first time?
Well, generally speaking, no. If you're denied, you probably would want to try and reapply, and that's not unexpected at all from somebody who couldn't get in the first time. If this is your fourth and fifth time, I don't know that they're actually going to consider you. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with reapplying, maybe even a second time. If you didn't make it the second time, you do it a third time. You reapply. That's a good question. I don't know that anybody has asked me that recently too. So.
Yeah, I was just wondering myself. Well, I've been asking my faculty and stuff about grad school recently too, and that was one of the questions that came up. And I didn't know if it was viable to even apply again to a school that you got rejected at.
No, I would definitely want to reapply. Part of the reason is that the first go around, the reasons for you not getting in may be different than what it's going to be the second time. You certainly may be a strong candidate the first time, but perhaps maybe they had some other candidates who were a bit stronger and they filled all their slots. The second time around, you may come in at a time when they don't have as many applicants, and you potentially have a shot at that time. And again, the applicant pool the second time around is going to look different than the first time, and you may, against the other candidates, just appear different than you did the first time, and something caught their eye, and you've got a better shot. Now they're going to know that you are reapplying, which is okay. I think most programs recognize that if a person hasn't gotten in the first time, that if they reapply, that it's a sign of tenacity and perseverance, and that you're interested in the program. Okay. Other questions? Anything else about application? Okay. Why is this doing this? Why is this popping up back to the very first slide? Huh. No, that's why. Okay. So this is an example of UNLV, and again, they're all going to vary depending upon each individual campus. So you wouldn't really have to worry about what this one looks like in particular. They're all going to be different, generally speaking. You know, of course, these are the kinds of things that are happening when you want to do it this way. Okay, sorry about this. So, part of the application process is filling out the application, and then you have to submit transcripts. That's pretty straightforward. Not a lot of science about that. You may have to submit test scores, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Preparing a portfolio. For some of you that maybe are in the arts or the fine arts, or other programs where what you do in the program is going to be reflected in what you've done in the past. You may have to provide a portfolio of your work, whether it's writing samples or examples of projects that you work on. For example, in journalism, they may want examples of articles that you had written. If you are applying to a program like a graphic arts graduate degree, it's potential that you're going to have to provide some of your photographs or any of the work that you did as a graphic artist. So a portfolio is really just whatever they're going to require of you for that particular program. It's not going to be true of every program, so you wouldn't have to worry about that if your discipline doesn't require. An interview. It's possible that you're going to get interviewed. Anybody here get interviewed for your admission to the college here? Do you get interviewed for getting into whatever program you're in here in Oshkosh in the college, like education? Because you have to be admitted to the college. Education major. How about nursing? Business? We're all LNS? That's just amazing. Okay. Well, LNS, of course, you don't have that because it's individual programs. You're not really being admitted to the college, you're being admitted to the programs. Okay, there can be an interview process, and when you're talking about interviewing, the same kinds of things apply in interviewing for graduate school as you would for a job. You have to think about different kinds of questions you might get, be prepared to answer those. The whole frame of reference that you have for going for a job is going to be the same thing about going to graduate school. We're not going to really talk specifically about the interview process here, but if you've got questions about it, you can do that. Okay, so here we are, we're talking about starting to apply for graduate school. What questions does anyone have about that process in terms of applying? Yeah.
Going back to your transcripts, what if you graduate and then you went into the workforce and now you decide to go back to get your master or doctor? Now, do you have to go back to your original university that you graduated from to get the transcript?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. She was asking if you graduate, then take some time off from going to school, like work or whatever, and then apply to graduate school. Do you have to go back to your original university to get the transcripts? And yes. And sometimes, depending upon if you went to multiple undergraduate campuses, they're going to require you to provide the transcripts for each one of those too. Just depends on how a particular school wants to do their calculation of their GPA and what they require for official verification of that. Okay. Other questions? Questions that you might have about transcripts? The interview, if you do want to ask any questions, anything in particular here? All right. Yes. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's right.
The essays.
Yeah.
How are those like? I've read the ones for here, and they say use graduate level style writing and APA format and stuff, but they give you basic just questions. Do you answer those questions as they give you, or do you actually just write a whole paper on what they give you? Does that make sense? Or?
Yeah, I think I understand. When you respond, you really do need to respond to what they're asking you for. So if they are a series of questions and they're looking for specific answers, if they don't give you any real direction about how to respond, meaning how long the answers need to be or any particular format, then you want to try and be as concise as possible. You want to try and answer exactly what they're asking for. And you can certainly embellish on that and add what it is that's going to set you apart from someone else when you respond to those. But unless they're really asking for quite a long narrative of some sort, you want to be fairly brief, because depending on how they go through the admission process, you've got individuals who are going to have to read all of those, and just like when faculty grade papers, it gets tough for them as they're going along.
So would I'd put that all on like one piece of paper, or however many pieces of paper, to take all those questions and put them in like a paragraph, like one paragraph per question or something like that? Is that how I would format that?
I mean, just for sake of reading, yes, you would want to dedicate, say, a paragraph to each question. But again, even though they may not tell you specifically how much to respond, or
Be succinct.
yeah, right. You want to be able to get your point across fairly easily and fairly understandably. But again, you're having to put a little bit in there that's going to set you apart from the others in terms of how you respond to those questions. There are also potential that you have to write an essay or some sort of actual paper. And again, the programs are generally going to show you what it is that, or tell you what it is that they want you to respond to. So you're always having to think about respond to or answer what they're asking for, because that's what they're looking for. Just like an assignment in a class, you're going to need to make sure you're giving the answer based upon what the question was. Pretty straightforward. Yes?
How much different is the application process if you were applying to graduate schools in other countries?
Well, there's kind of two phases to applying to schools abroad. One is the actual application process to get in, and the other one is going to be all of the requirements you have from an immigration standpoint that you need for both leaving the U.S. and for coming into a country. Generally speaking, they're not dependent upon each other in terms of that your admission decision is not going to depend upon whether or not you're able to get the visa. That's going to be a separate matter. So the application process is going to be fairly straightforward in terms of getting into the program in the college. It's going to be an application like you would see here in the U.S. They're going to ask for recommendations. They are going to want your credentials, your transcripts, that kind of thing. Depending upon where you apply to, you might have to provide them with a credential evaluation of your transcripts. Obviously, transcripts are not the same around the world. So the U.S. transcripts, while they tend to be more universal, that doesn't mean that the institution to which you apply is going to be able to interpret that transcript. So you might have to provide a third-party evaluation. And if you have to go through that, then there's costs associated with that. But the evaluator will give a report to that institution, and then they will know how to interpret the U.S. transcript against their particular country and their grading scales and that kind of thing. So you'll have to kind of look into that. It's much more complex. It is. It's a good question because it doesn't come up very often. But like I said, the general application process is not going to be too dissimilar from what you would do here in the States. But then you've got the whole immigration part that you need to take care of. And that one too, you would definitely want to give yourself plenty of time. Because they're treating you like a foreign student, just like if somebody came here and we treat them as a foreign international student. It usually takes longer for the process. And oftentimes, a foreign institution will identify in their instructions or in materials that they provide what are the procedures or how different are the procedures if you're applying as a foreign student to their institution. So you definitely will want to look at that to see what's required of you. Okay. Other questions? Anything else here? No? Okay. So, tests. This is the big one where there seems to be a fair amount of anxiety. We touched on it a little bit on Monday, but it's all going to depend upon the circumstances in terms of what you're coming up against in the application process. So, the GRE, the GMAT are probably the two most common in terms of being more broadly across graduate programs. GRE, of course, is the most common for a more general sort of scholastic aptitude test. The GRE is specifically designed to measure sort of your broad-based knowledge and general understanding of concepts and theories and so forth. There is also a portion of the GRE where you actually would take it relative to a specific subject. Some of those tests that are available, for example, like in psychology, there is a subject test of the GRE in psychology where there will be questions more related to psychology. And when you're applying to a psychology program, they're going to be more interested in the GRE psychology subject test than they would be the general test. But this is information you need to follow up with ahead of time so that you know what are the requirements. Anybody here take a look at the GRE in terms of what's needed or do any sort of exploration about the GRE? Okay. Yeah.
Well, I've heard a comment from at least two faculty members saying that the GRE actually isn't very indicative of good or of success in the graduate program.
Mm-hmm.
And then I heard last night that the GRE is actually in the process of getting phased out. Is that something that's happening in the near future, or is that?
Well, the GRE, I think what they're referring to in terms of being phased out is that the current form of the test is going to be phased out, and they're coming out with a new version of it beginning next summer. And the DRE test itself is not going away, but the format as it is today is going to be very different. And so what's going to happen too is, that's interesting you brought that up. If you're thinking about graduate school and you're going to need to take the GRE, one of the things that you're going to want to find out is when is that test score going to need to be into the program to which you're applying, because the ETS organization that administers the GRE test is going to have a special schedule set up coming into next summer about how long it is until the end of the summer you can take the old test, and then when they're going to switch over to the new tests. And then the test results from the old test are going to have a different delivery date than the scores for the new test. So it's a little complicated, but you need to make sure that you're checking this out ahead of time with the testing center and with the ETS website, which is where you can get a lot of GRE information. One of the things here is this is kind of what, this is what the ETS and GRE website looks like for you. And there's a portion of it, or the main part that you're going to be interested in when you're coming in here to get information is about the portion that says for test takers. And it identifies all the different kinds of things that you want to explore about the GRE. So this is not, this is a great place to start in terms of getting information, because this is about the GRE from ETS, who administers the GRE. A secondary source of information for you is going to be the testing center. So in Polk Library, in the basement where the testing center is, you may have been there to take tests before. They also offer you an opportunity to take the GRE there if you want to take it there. We are a testing center for ETS and the GRE, along with, we also give the TOEFL, and we do the Miller Analogies test, and potentially, I'm not sure about like the LSAT and the MCAT, the legal admission test and the medical admission test. We generally don't have students going through our programs that are looking at that. But this is, like I said, a great place to go to get information about GRE, because it's going to be helpful for you. Okay. The graduate management admissions test is most likely the test you would have to take if you're going to go to an MBA program or a graduate level business program of some sort. It's pretty standard, pretty common for those programs. You might have an opportunity to submit a GRE instead, but again, it's up to the program. They're the ones who decide what you're going to have to submit. Anybody here take the GMAT? We've got an MBA program. We have a fairly large MBA program at Oshkosh. Between 300 and 400 students in the program as of this fall, and a lot of our business students end up coming here. But the GMAT is a pretty common test to take, and it's an interesting experience if you have to take it. We don't actually offer the test any longer. The organization that administers the test changed the way they administer it, and a lot of schools lost the ability to do the test. So there are only 4 locations in the state right now that administer the GMAT. So you'll be a little bit limited if you have to go somewhere and take the test. Okay. Any law school or medical school potentials here? Okay. Oh, okay. Law school? Med school? Which one? Law school? Okay, all right. The LSAT and the MCATs are a whole nother process of testing for you to get into schools. And they're actually involved in part of the admission process of funneling people who take the test to particular programs depending upon where you apply. So it's going to be worth your time to explore those websites and get information from them as far in advance as you can, because you're going to have to take those in order to get in. I'm not aware of any schools that don't require that, any law schools that don't require the LSAT, or medical schools that require the MCAT. Now, all this said about tests, the one thing that I want everybody to know is, as I alluded to before, it might be possible you don't have to take any test. If you check out what program you're applying to, and they're going to list for you and identify what your admission requirements are. They may not require a GRE, or they may not require a Miller Analogies test, which is, again, another form of standardized test. And that's cool. So then you don't have to sweat taking the test or having to pay for the test. Because, as an example, the GRE costs $160 to take a test. To subject yourself to frustration and anxiety and a pain in the butt, you get to pay $160. GMAT's $250 It's $220. That's a lot of money.
You know how much the math is?
It was, the last I knew, it was around $80.
Sweet.
Yes, it's a little cheaper. It's only an hour test too. The MAT is only an hour. But yeah, so when I talked earlier about application fees, you also have to think about test fees, because if you have to take tests, you're going to have to pay money for that, and likely that you're going to be able to use the score multiple times, which is good, so you don't have to take the test each time. But that's why you also want to do as well as you can, because if you're having to share that test among schools, one score or a score for one school may not be the necessary score for another school. So that's a consideration that you have to have. Okay, other questions about tests? And the test preparation stuff there, you can do it online. You can go to the bookstore. You can work with our testing center. You can actually do sample tests. I mean, there's all sorts of resources out there for you. Some of it you can pay for. You can take classes if you want to do that. And a lot of it is free. You just, well, relatively speaking, if you pay for a tutorial, like a DVD or a CD or something like that. But you can certainly have access to a lot of resources in order to study for any of those tests. Okay, any questions about that? About tests? Please ask questions as we're going along, because this is, like I said, this is about trying to help you understand what the process is. And I want to be sure that if you go through the process and you're not quite certain about something, to ask the questions. Okay, another piece to this is writing. And there are a couple of areas where you'll end up having to generally provide some writing. We talked a little earlier about it in terms of essay, personal statement, or part of your portfolio, but you also have letters of recommendation. And even though the letters aren't generally written by you, that's a piece of writing and information that is going to be shared with the program who's making the admission decision. So you want to work with your faculty, and we'll talk about that here in a second, about the letter of reference. But let's talk about the personal statement. Anybody ever do their own personal sort of vision statement? Have you been through exercises with a class or two on doing that? No? Okay. When you're thinking about a personal statement for graduate school, it's sort of going to need to be a bit broad, but then also specific. And that sounds a little convoluted, but you're going to have to address the personal statement from the standpoint of what it means and what it is about you that makes you a good candidate for the program, and then also how it applies to the program. And you're not going to necessarily know that until you actually know which programs you need to apply to. So then you're going to need to fit your personal statement towards that. I don't usually spend a lot of time with people talking about writing the personal statement, because it's a relatively specific and sort of personal process, but I recommend some things very basic. You should always try to rewrite and proof your statement as often as you can. When it comes to the graduate level, if you're not keen on following up with your typing, your spelling, grammar, all that kind of stuff, it is going to sway people who have to review that, because you're expected to be able to write at the graduate level. And you want to take some time to be sure you've written and rewritten and edited. Have other people read your statement. That's real important, so that you can get some options or ideas from them. You can certainly, when you look at something out on the web, if you want to just go out there and Google writing personal statements for grad school, you'll get all sorts of information, and you can actually see examples. There'll be lots of samples out there of different sorts of personal statements that are written. Yeah, I mean, it's a process that you're going to get out of it what you put into it. That's not really any sort of magic. Any thoughts or ideas about that? Any questions about personal statements? Okay. The Oshkosh Writing Center is here as a resource to help you. They'll be more than willing to help you with doing your personal statement, or if you have to write any sort of goals or some sort of paper for graduate school admission. So they're also very interested in helping you doing that. Your resume could also be a part of your application packet, and you need to provide a current resume up to date. It goes without saying that the folks here in the career services area can certainly help you with that. They have all sorts of resources to do that, and you may work with others in putting your resume together. But that might be a part of the application materials that are required, so you need to make sure you have something like that ready to go. And again, you can do some adjusting and tweaking of that to match more specifically a particular program that you're applying to, but having the basic pieces of it put together ahead of time is going to be helpful, so you're not doing that all at the last minute. Okay. Any questions about the writing stuff so far? Okay. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. What's the curricular vita?
The CV, the CV is what's often referred to, like you said, as a curricular vita, is the standard for a resume in the academic world, generally speaking. So it's done quite differently than a business professional resume, because the curricula vita lists out things like publications or presentations that people have done. It lists out panels that a person may have been a part of. It certainly has all the education. It's going to have positions you've held and so forth, but it's generally more for an academic environment. But you know, Oshkosh has a lot of teachers, so I've got it there in part too for them to understand that there's a different terminology they use for it. Generally speaking, that's what's referred to as a curricular vita. Okay. The last piece about the writing are the letters of recommendation. Anybody here talk to a faculty member yet about being a reference? Okay. How did that go for you?
Good. I've been researching him for a year and a half now, so.
Okay. Excellent. He said he's done research with them, which is a great way of having a connection with the faculty member. Yes, how about you?
I contacted my English composition professor from my freshman year.
Okay.
We've kept in contact. He's written a letter for a job for me, and he has told me he would help me with my senior thesis.
Oh, okay. So just from either one of you, can you give us an idea of how this worked out in terms of, in your case, giving a reference for you? Have you talked about that with the faculty member in terms of what they would write or how they would provide that for you?
I didn't actually ask him. He actually pointed me out as being a candidate for grad school.
Okay.
He kind of saw it in me that he knew that I would be somebody who would be interested in that.
Yeah.
So he kind of made himself available in that way.
Okay. Did you actually did he provide the actual letter? He actually
Not
went
yet.
through it? Okay. How about you? Have you talked at all with the faculty member about being a reference?
Yeah, I've talked to him about it, and he's, I don't know, just all throughout working with him, I've made sure that everything he's asked for, I'm punctual and, as quick turnaround as I can, and he's, really taken a shine to that and told me, yeah, if you need a letter recommendation, let me know, and he listed off what he was going to put in it, and so.
Okay. When he told you what he was going to put into it, did he ask you ahead of time what are the kinds of things you'd like him to highlight if he wanted to do it? Any of them? Okay.
I just figured my work probably speaks for itself.
Well, and that's great. That's good. Sometimes a reference will ask a person to say, what are some of the things you want me to be sure I highlight? They won't ask you necessarily to write it, although I suppose that could happen. But
I'm kind of following the same education path that he did back when he was going through school, so I guess I'm hoping that he'll know what is important to highlight.
Yeah. Well, and that's true. They generally will. Okay. The one thing that you point out about a reference, which is very good, is the idea that because he's been working with a faculty member for the last year and a half, I'm sure on things related to the discipline and course assignments and work from courses, that's a very good way to demonstrate in terms of an application to graduate school your readiness for graduate school, that you've done some research or that you've worked collaboratively with a faculty member. And that's to faculty members who are making admission decisions about you, that's very important. because they're really key on the idea that when you have work or have involvement in an academic setting, that can be very applicable in graduate school. So, very good. Okay. Other questions? Anything about before we leave this here? Are there any aspects of the application process that we haven't touched on yet at this point that you have questions about? Anything jumping out at you? Okay. Well, let's talk about a little bit about financial aid, just so that you have an idea of what you're going to find. On the last couple of slides, too, in that PowerPoint, when you're online with that, it's going to provide you with links to a number of financial aid resources, and those are very helpful. They're generally going to start leading you in the right direction to find financial aid. You're not necessarily going to click on the first one and they're going to say, oh, here's a bunch of money to go to graduate school. It doesn't really work that way. It'd be nice if it did, but it doesn't. When you're in graduate school, I always recommend to students and potential students continue to go through the FAFSA process. Even though it's not fun, you do need to provide that in a number of situations where the FAFSA information is used for considering some sort of aid or assistance at the graduate level. Not all of it. And potentially you could get by without having to do it. But I recommend it just because you've been in the habit probably of doing it while you're an undergrad. And when it's there and ready to go for you as a graduate student, you don't have to worry about rushing to get it done. Other than, of course, you have to have it in for the deadline. But if you go ahead and do it just like you would as an undergraduate student, it's just going to be to your advantage because that information is going to be there if a financial source comes up with needing information from that. So I would just continue to do that. Anybody here know what an assistantship is? Have you heard anything about what assistantships are at the graduate level? Could you just, what do you know about it?
That they give you aid in exchange for work, like being a TA or some of the research projects.
Yeah, right. Graduate assistant, research assistant, teaching assistant, those are common terms that are used for that kind of financial aid. And like she said, it's in exchange for work. You're actually an employee. You work for the program or you work for the college, whomever it is that hires you. You actually get paid. Now, the salary you get as a grad assistant is going to be tied to what other benefits or aid you get as a part of being a graduate assistant. One of the things that you can often be eligible for are actual benefits like health insurance or dental insurance, any other sorts of insurance that might be offered as a part of that institution. You could be eligible for that as a grad assistant. And again, it depends upon whatever kind of contractor or assistant position you're hired for. All of that would be identified for you as to say, well, if you apply for this and got this assistantship, you would have this, this, and this as a part of your package. Or if you applied for something else, you would have this and this. So you're made aware of that. You know about that ahead of time. It's also possible that with an assistantship, you would have access to graduate student housing tied to that. At Oshkosh, as an example, we don't have graduate student housing, but at a place like Madison or Ohio State, where they have numerous programs that are full-time and they have lots of graduate students, the potential for housing options becomes real important. And part of a graduate assistantship could be tied to a benefit for giving you access to or saying that you are eligible for graduate student housing by being a graduate assistant, or maybe it otherwise wouldn't be available. It just depends on the campus. Okay. Any questions about that? Assistant? You certainly can find loans at the graduate level, but they're not going to be the variety of loans that you might have at the undergraduate level. I know we don't want to talk about the idea of having to add more loans onto what you might already have for loan debt at the undergraduate level, but you can be eligible for student loans at the graduate level, so you don't use up all that eligibility just as an undergraduate. So you do have some options there. And I'm not going to go through all the particulars here in terms of how you find this. Working with your financial aid offices are really the best way to do it, and working with the grad school or the grad program to which you apply, they're going to be able to provide that kind of information for you too. Grants and scholarships, pretty straightforward. There are lots of them out there. Those links that I have, they'll point you to some of that, but you do have to dig for them. They're not necessarily going to be up front and center. Although again, when you explore individual graduate programs, they'll usually identify for you what specific scholarships or grants within that discipline and for that program would be available, because they want to attract students to their program. The program itself or the college may have put together some funding for scholarships and grants, however they would do it. And you would certainly find that out from them. And then, again, they would have an application process not unlike any other scholarship or grant. Same kind of process that you would have to think about. Okay. Anybody here thinking about moving to someplace else other than Wisconsin for grad school? Where?
There's a couple schools down in Florida I was looking at, and then over in Seattle.
Florida and Washington. Okay. It's a nice variety there. How about you?
I want to go to grad school out of the country, so Australia, Japan,
Okay.
UK, wherever lets me.
Okay. Well, that's great. You know, not a lot of people actually at this stage decide they want to go to grad school across or overseas. But that's cool. Well, yours is going to be a little bit different, but for you or for anybody, when you're going out of state for school, one of the things that you should do is consider state residency a financial aid for you. What that means is that when you get to a particular state and you're going to go to graduate school there, if you need to find out what the requirement is at the school is in order to establish residency for purposes of getting tuition at the state rate. It's just like in Wisconsin, we have a resident rate and a non-resident rate. It might be worth your while in terms of your debt to hold off and become a resident first if you can afford to take the time off before you start school, but you'll save yourself a whole bundle of money. So if it's a 6 months requirement that you live in the state before you can be eligible for state residency, you might want to do that before you actually begin a graduate program, because it's going to be cheaper. Now you have to kind of do your own cost benefit analysis of that. You know, does it make sense to save the money, or are you really on a path that means you've got to get the degree done, or else you're going to lose out on potential earning income? That might be the issue you have to deal with. Wisconsin, as an example, you can't move here to go to school for residency purposes. You'll be considered a non-resident. So even if you came here, got a job in the summer, started school in the fall, went through school for the academic year, then worked again in the summer and continued to work in the summer. In Wisconsin, you will never be considered a resident until you stay out of school for at least a year. So that's why it gets a little tricky, but it might be to your benefit, because here non-resident tuition is 3 times what you pay for state resident tuition. That's a lot of money. So if you add all of that up, it might be worth saving that or going that 6 months or maybe a year. I think generally a year is going to be fairly common too, to establish state residency. So something to think about, because heading off to a different state, that's a great idea, but it might cost you a lot of money if you don't have yourself prepared for that. Okay. Questions about financial aid? Other stuff going on with you about financial aid? Anything you want to know that I can try and answer? Not? Okay. The last couple of slides in this PowerPoint, like I said here online, are resources that I made available to you. Financial assistance, I have a whole page in here for different links that you can look at. And then this one is just some general resource and information. But all of these links should be good. I check these every fall and spring, make sure that they're current so that you don't get lost on those. So generally speaking, that's kind of those are a lot of the things that you're going to encounter through the process of applying to graduate school. Are there other particular questions, items, issues that you would want me to cover? You there? Well, as I mentioned on Monday, this is a little evaluation if you would mind taking a minute to fill it out. As I mentioned on Monday, I'm more than happy to meet with anyone if you want to talk about any of these kinds of things related to graduate school. You don't have to be going to graduate school at Oshkosh to come by and try to get some answers to questions. Our office is a student support area, so we're definitely going to want to try and help you get information, get answers.